So thank you for inviting me to your stage, and Amy as well. Amy, the Creators Code, I'm going to be editorially inappropriate here because we're not at the end of the show. I love the book. And as I just told you, I have instructed, I would like our editorial people, but I've instructed the people at the Atlantic Media Company is profitable. I mean, the 157-year-old magazine is profitable. But with this, I know that we could be vastly more profitable with the insights that you've gleaned from nearly 200 plus interviews from some of the best brand name entrepreneurs in the system. And it would be great if you would just walk us through, just give us a few minutes of the sort of 6 key factors that you've distilled as being fundamental to the success stories of some people we think are extraordinary. When you read Walter Isaacson's book, he pitches these geniuses out there as extraordinary. What I find brilliant about your book is you're saying most of them are ordinary, but they did certain things. Do I have that right?
That's correct. Right. So I just want to say a absolutely huge thank you to the Wilson Center, to Jane Harmon, and to everybody who is working at the Wilson Center, because I did spend a number of years here in an office. I consider this my home, really, especially in Washington, D.C., and it's wonderful to be back here. It's like this great homecoming to be able to talk about a book that I just, had piles of papers and boxes of books and books coming out of the Wilson Center Library to the Library of Congress, back and forth, and it was a hard
I
push.
bet they're in shock you finally finished.
I know, it is. It's a great relief to everyone here, I'm sure. But I'm really grateful to be at the Wilson Center. And in terms of a real quick snapshot, I was a White House fellow, and this came very much out of a public policy interest, because I was at the trade rep's office and doing economics. I had come from Silicon Valley to Washington, D.C., and the companies that we saw basically were big companies. So Walmart would come in about every 6 weeks into the White House and say, oh, we built stores in China, but now the government won't build roads to them. Or, these are big problems of big companies that end up in the White House complex. And I was invited to this party in New York during that time, and all these entrepreneurs were there. And a number of people that were fundamentally changing the way we lived, like the Google founders and eBay and Gilt Group, and I was fascinated.
Were they white wine people, red wine people, beer?
I think they were like
mixed drinks.
I don't know. I'm not even sure. Does it matter?
Well, whenever you get a whole big room of entrepreneurs, I really want to know what they're drinking.
Oh, well, I'll pay more attention next time. I wasn't paying attention to what they were drinking. I was paying attention, though, to the fact that there was no red tape. There was no bureaucracy. They were just standing up these ideas. And I had been in school with some of them out west, and I knew they weren't really perfect people, and yet they were building things in real time, like the next ideas. And I'm trained as a sociologist with an MBA, so I'm always interested in people and what makes them tick. And so I thought if I could just spend some time with them and ask them a whole lot of questions, that maybe we could, make a code. We could figure the commonalities so more people could create and scale ideas. And that's where it comes from, this, the whole beginning of the book. And the data, I'm a data nerd, so I can tell you that firms less than 5 years old create all the net new jobs in the U.S. So really, from a public policy point of view, we want creators. I mean, the economy needs people to start and scale new ideas. I can also tell you the millennials are not doing this. In the last 6 weeks, the data has come out showing that the younger generation, it's not 25-year-olds wearing hoodies in Silicon Valley. It's just not. The fastest growing demographic is baby boomers that are starting companies. The average age of a first-time entrepreneur in the U.S. is 39. And we need all people to create their ideas. We really do need the millennials to engage here. And they're a huge portion of the population because they're the baby boomers' kids, right? But at any rate, so that's the ingoing reason to write the book, and I'm very relieved that it's out. It's like in the marketplace.
Well, it's a phenomenon. Walk us through some of the names. I can imagine Jane Harmon and the Wilson Center wanting to convene. If I were in Jane's role, I would convene immediately the people you interviewed. Take us through who some of these people are, because it's an amazing roster.
Okay, so Elon Musk, founder of Tesla and SpaceX and
Musk.
PayPal.
But you knew him before he was big.
Well, he's become
big.
like a hero figure now. He was not a hero figure in 2008. Let's just say, like this success has been hard fought by Elon. It's not an automatic thing.
Right.
Oh, really?
Really? Wow.
Yeah.
I think that's a tweetable item. This is on the record, right? So that
Yeah.
So Elon Musk.
People like Elon Musk, Reid Hoffman at LinkedIn, Peter Thiel at PayPal and Palantir, first money behind Facebook, Steve Ells at Chipotle, Sarah Blakely at Spanx, Kevin Plank right here at Under Armour. I absolutely adore Kevin. Joe Gibbion, Brian Chesky at Airbnb, Drew Houston at Dropbox. I was very
Guilt, Jawbone,
Yep.
Zipcar, Theranos, JetBlue. I mean, it's an incredible array of people you went out to interview. So I guess I can imagine your office having been cluttered full of reams of paper, envelope interviews that you might have got with somebody that you met in an airplane. I mean, it just looked, I'm sure it wasn't as ordered a process as you made it sound like in the book. At what point do you think that you knew what was the secret sauce that you had? You didn't go in. Did you go in with these ideas and said,
No.
okay? So where was the aha moment that you said, okay, I get it. All of these people did these 6 things. And
Yes.
tell us what these 6 things are.
Okay, so the aha moment takes a couple years to get to, is the truth.
So you're muddled in paper and chaos and
Yes,
don't know
it's
what you're
totally
doing at your
chaotic.
Wilson Center Fellowship, and they're wondering, why are we investing all this money in you?
And they're very patient people around here, and I'm very
Because
grateful.
they get their money from the
That's
government.
right. I
Some
guess
of
that's
it.
right. Oh, that's tough.
not all of it. No,
That was not tweetable. Yeah.
no, less and less patient, the government.
So basically, the research is a grounded theory method. So it's a sociology-based qualitative research, and you have to go out. There are 10,000 pages of transcripts behind this. And 5,000 pages of annual reports and 10Ks and 10Qs, 4,000 pages of academic studies across disciplines. So I was reading creativity and organizational behavior, behavioral economics, strategy. Really trying to decipher what the repeated patterns were. And I distilled it down, but it takes coding and categorizing, and it is this massive endeavor. One of my research assistants here used to tell me, I open the door to your office and there's just papers everywhere, and I think you're totally lost. And then I've decided you're like the crazy scientist lady, because all of a sudden it starts making sense, and you see 6 things that are over and over that people are saying, maybe with different language, but they're the same skills. They're the same things that people are doing. And so the 6 things are, in brief, 1 is called Find the Gap. How do you spot opportunities that others don't see? And there are 3 ways that I'm observing people doing that. 1 is what I'm calling a sunbird. So the sunbird is an Australian word for hummingbird, and it's the idea that you see something in one place, you pick it up, you fly it over, and you reapply it somewhere else. So a great example is Bob Langer at the MIT. He runs a biotechnology lab. He's spun out 25 companies over 100 million in annual revenue. That's the target for the data set, companies that scale over 100 million in annual revenue. And Bob Langer, for example, saw the Intel Inside chip in a computer and said, hey, let's make that in a human body. And now they're releasing osteoporosis drugs as of 2012 in a little microchip inside of the human body. So he sees it in one place and he basically builds it in another place. And then another way to find a gap would be to do it as an architect, build absolutely from the ground up. So it's just, this is Elon Musk as an example, and he has at one point looked at the NASA website and said, how come we're not taking life to Mars? And this is a problem that needs to be solved. And
He's an interesting guy.
Yeah, he's brilliant. I think,
I've asked him what limitations does he see out there. He says, my only limitation is physics.
well, he's a
Interesting, yeah.
physicist. He's a physicist. I think he's basically Albert Einstein meets Steve Jobs. He's trained as a physicist. He loves design. He likes to make things beautiful. The Tesla is a very beautiful car. But with SpaceX, he's built from the ground up a rocket. They are resupplying the International Space Station.
Right.
They do it at 1/10 the cost that NASA did. It's extraordinary. And I was just with Elon a couple weeks ago in LA. They were trying to land, his big thing is a reusable rocket. They tried to land that on a platform in the ocean, didn't work. Elon's saying they're going to do another shot at it in April. He thinks it will work by June. But that is building something that people haven't built before. And so I'm categorizing that as an architect. And then the third way of seeing a gap would be like the
I'd
Chipotle.
call it an obsessed architect.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he works hard, but he is able to build things and ask questions and see ways of creating that other people
But the
don't see.
obsessiveness, the never give up, never surrender DNA of a lot of these guys is part of your picture. I mean, they don't stop.
That's right. So Elon, there's a great quote, and it really caught my attention. I was on the factory floor with him at Tesla, and I said, you know what, you don't worry about failure? Because, you know, Tesla took 6 years to get the first car off the line. That was hard,
Well, and,
very
they,
hard.
and they failed the first. I mean, I
Oh,
didn't
they
know until
failed
I
and
got to
failed.
the end of your book that he kind of fired half of his crowd the
That's
first
right.
time around, right? He
That's
made
right.
too heavy a car. It wasn't working. It was based in Detroit, and he picked up and moved, right?
Well, it didn't work. They used a Lotus Elise, the body of the car of the Lotus Elise, and then it had weight distribution that didn't work, and that 7,000 little batteries on the floor of the car, like, you know, were catching on fire at one point, and you know, there were things that weren't working. And so yeah, that was very hard. And SpaceX, you know, they had 3 rocket explosions before the 4th one worked. They're not obvious things. But the quote that was really memorable to me is I said to Elon, well, you don't worry about failure? And he said, no, I feel fear strongly. But then you believe what you're doing matters. And even if you're scared, you still keep going.
Jane?
Like that's,
I have to leave, which reluctantly, and this is fascinating. I got my book, though. I hope you all do, too. Just wanted to mention that that's not just an entrepreneur's trait. Think of Franklin Roosevelt during the Depression, where he wasn't afraid to fail. And we need more entrepreneurs.
Well, one of the questions I
and
want to bring up with
politicians
Amy, and
who
I was going to
aren't
mention
afraid to
Sid
fail.
Harmon, is that there are people like Sid Harmon. There's a guy I knew in Bartlesville, Oklahoma, named Armai Aratunov. He was a Russian emigre. He created a pump called Reda Pump that the oil and water boom in the Midwest would not have happened without. That a lot of the things you're talking about are not alien in other entrepreneurships. And, you know, people, I knew Sid in the latter years of his life, but when you sort of looked at what he built, how he built it, and the trail, it's there. The question is, it seems to have sped up and dispersed. But we'll get to that.
well, I just want
Thank
to
you so
say
much, Jane.
that I 100% believe this, and the reason that the book, I think, matters is it's the whole new world of work.
Mm-hmm.
So I think these 6 skills, they apply in political arenas and in government and in nonprofits. I mean, the data set here is informed by entrepreneurs, but I think it's everyone that needs to be more entrepreneurial, right? So I appreciate that comment very much because I think that's the new way that everyone has to be, you know, managing careers. Right. Yeah.
Great. Thank you
Thank
so
you,
much, Amy.
thank you.
So, Amy, walk us through, before I interrupt you, walk us through some of the other core areas.
So find the gap is
Right,
the first
right.
one. Drive for daylight is the second one. How do you manage speed like a race car driver? And the idea is you look for the light on the horizon, not the lines on the pavement,
You
not
use
the
a lot of
competitors
like
next to you.
driving and flying metaphors.
Yeah, so the next one is fly the OODA loop, and that stands for observe, orient, decide, and act. It was originally a fighter pilot mantra. How do you shoot down an opposing fighter jet in 40 seconds or less? There was a man named 40-Second Boyd. Legend has it he absolutely never lost a dogfight, and so I am applying that in the business world. You can observe, orient, decide, and act faster than a competitor. You stay
Go
ahead.
through that slowly for the people watching online. Observe,
Observe,
orient, decide,
orient.
and act.
That's right. Decide
it's a
and
good,
act.
cool chapter in the book.
Yeah.
I was like going, what is she getting at? I thought this was going to be the Achilles heel of the book.
No,
turns out it was
it's cool.
not.
The
Yeah,
OODA loop,
yeah.
you have to fly the OODA loop.
OODA loop,
That's
yeah,
right.
okay.
And then the 4th skill is called fail wisely. And this is not just failing fast and failing forward. This is the idea that you set a failure ratio. You know you will be imperfect. So 20% or 30% or 10%, whatever, you have an ingoing assumption, you're going to get it wrong because you're pushing the envelope. And that's okay. And then it's about resilience and getting up another time. The 5th skill is called network minds. It's about drawing brain power towards you. So how do you network cognitive diversity? And we talk a lot about diversity, what we look like on the outside. So race, gender, socioeconomic differences. I'm most interested in what goes on inside your mind. That's the cognitive diversity. So that chapter is how do you bring minds to you to solve problems in new ways. And then the 6th skill is called gift small goods. And that's a small good would be a small kindness, a small favor. In the workplace, it would look like forwarding a resume, writing a few lines of code.
That kind of read to me like, don't be a jerk.
Well, I think that's probably right.
Without naming names, Travis Kalanick is not the nicest guy in the world, right?
Right.
So the Uber guy. So does the Uber CEO fit the gift small goods?
So the
Formula?
Uber example is not in the book intentionally.
Ah, okay.
Right?
Got it, okay.
So there are some people that don't always fit this. I don't know if Steve Jobs would have been, you know, in this category. The vast majority of people are more productive because they are kind. And this is new in the last 5 years.
And they're kind, like you would talk about Reid Hoffman being kind. I'm putting words in your mouth, selfishly, that he had a self-interest
That's
in the
right.
kindness that he was generating, that it was not kindness for kindness' sake, that actually he saw it as the right, in the ecosystem he was creating, it was the methodology that worked.
So Reid Hoffman is the co-founder of LinkedIn. This is the very basis of LinkedIn. So Reid believes that if we have transparency in the economy and we can all know each other professionally, and employees can reference check bosses as well as bosses reference checking employees, there's more pressure to behave better. So people want to work with other people who are opening doors for them and forwarding resumes and helping them out, critiquing proposals, making them more effective. So nice guys finish first, right? In the past, it used to be sort of morally right to support your colleagues. But with transparency, we know how people behave. And those who are supporting others and helping out, they get information coming to them, they get talent coming to them, deal flow coming to them, opportunities of all kinds. And so this transparency and rapid communication shifts this paradigm. I actually believe it puts more pressure on better behavior.
So let's walk through the book, and pretty soon we'll move to all of you as well. But one of the things that I found appealing about the book was that you didn't look at just New York and West Coast entrepreneurs. So the Under Armour guy, Kevin Plank, is that
Kevin
right?
Plank out of Baltimore.
And Chipotle
Out of Denver.
Out of Denver. Steve Case, who in a way was one of the early tech entrepreneurs who was obsessed with getting people connected to this thing and personalizing an internet experience which just didn't exist outside academic environments. Has the same belief that the entrepreneurship that we're seeing kind of boom in places like the West Coast of the United States can happen anywhere. So we went on a big blue bus this last summer called the Rise of the Rest bus. It was actually Mike Huckabee's former political campaign bus. They painted it blue. It was really cool. Mike traveled in class. And we went to Des Moines, we went to St. Louis, we went to Kansas City, and we met and we went on these essentially entrepreneur crawls. We went to these startup crawls and found brilliant ideas. But what they don't have as much on the West Coast in New York is money, the cash flow. It's harder, it's more difficult. And so we can get into to the characteristics, but I'm interested in the fact that you did highlight people that were in that sort of heartland arena outside the main thoroughfares. And you didn't talk a lot about money and finance. But I'm wondering how that sort of fell into some of your interviews.
So I was very deliberate to not just have this focus on Silicon Valley or New York or Boston. So I wanted to be able to pattern recognize across geographies and across different types of businesses. That's also important because a lot of people are just talking about tech companies or just retail companies or just real estate companies. So this is a broad-based look.
You wanted to get burritos in there.
That's right.
Yeah.
So Chipotle, yeah, Steve Ells just loves burritos. That's, over 20 billion in revenue business. I mean, that's an absolutely enormous. Chipotle is a huge company now, but it started out of San Francisco just because a classically trained chef loved burritos and started slinging burritos, as his dad would say. So yeah, it was a deliberate look across. And I think that you can start one of these ideas anywhere. So there's access to capital issues. There's research showing that, it's a whole lot easier when you live in Silicon Valley because Sand Hill Road is right there. There's also access to capital for women is difficult and because they just don't have the same networks in. So an initiative like Rise for the Rest that Steve Case is doing, very important because it brings money to people who have ideas. But the basis of the research around here is that all of us can create and scale these ideas. So it's the leadership skills are, they're universal.
Now, I always hate these book reviews or these people who interview authors who sort of raise the things that you didn't talk about, but I feel compelled to. So you've sort of focused on entrepreneurs that had made it.
Right.
These are the big success stories. And I've often thought two things. One, and these are economic success stories, that as I read your book, I said, wow, in almost any field, nonprofit, doing good in a community, how to run a school, things that didn't have the stunningly large payoffs financially that that a lot of this could work in the Wilson Center. It could work in the Atlantic Media Company. It could work in the elementary school down the street. And so I'm interested to what degree you've begun to think about the applicability of some of the lessons here to sort of non-financially remunerative areas, or are you just focused on ideas that win big bucks?
No, so the research also has social entrepreneurs in the data set. So I interviewed the founders of Teach for America, Ashoka Endeavor, Vision Spring, Acumen Fund, Room to Read,
that another
all of those
book?
people. Maybe, maybe it is. But I think that, again, it applies if you want to do a nonprofit, if you want to work in government. These are universal skills. I do believe it's for the new world of work. We all need to be more entrepreneurial. And the good news of working inside of a larger organization is that if you move the dial even 2 or 3 or 4%, in government or in a large corporation, it's turning the Titanic, right? I mean, you really have a lot of volume behind you. And so if you can apply these skills inside large corporations, you can, affect a huge amount of change. And now I'm on a book tour, and a lot of people are asking me, how do you do this in big corporations? I'm starting to get those kinds of questions. And I think one fundamental difference is the entrepreneurs are willing to have a good fight. Like, they actually are willing to stand up and disagree with each other all the time in teams. So the PayPal team is a great example, and they fly the OODA loop. They anchor this OODA loop chapter, but they all think of themselves as intellectuals. They are business people, but they have different points of view. They are willing to speak up. They have an obligation to dissent. In corporations and in government, we're often striving for consensus, and that can lead to complacency. That's a big difference. And so I think that you can apply these skills, but you have to be willing to really speak your mind and go forward pretty independently, respecting other people and partnering at the same time. But the drive for consensus is different inside of large organizations.
So the element I really want to highlight in this comes from a couple of interviews I did this past year as well with other entrepreneurs that hadn't made your book, but Jimmy John Leotote, so he made Jimmy John's sandwiches, John Paul DeJoria, who created Paul Mitchell's hair systems, and he's the Patron tequila guy. He makes very good tequila. I had it on stage with him. Daniel Lubetzky of Kind Bar. So I knowing them, and I was reading your book thinking, wow, I bet they've gone through similar things. But one of the things when you met Daniel, I mean, they all had a mission, which was interesting to me. Daniel Lubetzky wanted to be a kind of peacenik in the Middle East, and it led to healthy food and the search for healthy food. Jimmy John Leotote had essentially been told by his father, you either go to college or here's some money to do a startup or you join the military. And so he just faced a hard choice and then went out, began making sandwiches. And so it's sort of an interesting thing when you look at it. But what I was, LaJoya, who of Paul Mitchell's system, he and Paul Mitchell had a $500,000 investment coming in for this hair products company that fell through in the last minute. So they each scraped together about $800. So they were able to hold on to the whole thing and then launched this thing. It went crazy. But he had been a gang member. He was sleeping in a car off of Hollywood and Vine. I mean, so the ordinariness of people who strike it is what I think is interesting. And can you talk to us a little bit about the fact that the on-ramp you're describing is accessible for many people if they're able to order these skills? That's I think the zinger in the book. In contrast to all of these books we're reading about innovators who, are all worth some sort of shade of genius that we'll never attain.
Right. So that's the big aha, is that everyone can create and scale their ideas. And the 6 skills here will advantage you. It's not a guarantee that it will work, right? But it is based on 5 years of research and homework. I feel like I did the homework. I'm trying to hand over tried and true skills that will advantage other people. One example that is one I love are 2 mothers in the East Bay of San Francisco, and they start Revolution Foods. And this is over $100 million in annual revenue, but it is just 2 moms that want better nutrition for their kids, and they want then better nutrition in the school system. And they are running an unbelievably complicated business model. They have culinary centers, 7 of them across the United States. They own trucks that are moving school lunches into unified school districts. They certainly are outsourcing organic products from local farmers and everything else into the various regional places, believing that students will learn better if they are healthier and if they are eating better. And that's simply, 2 women who just decided they would start that.
How did they go out and get the expertise to hire the right lawyers, to protect their idea, to develop a distribution plan. I mean, part of what I don't get about some of this, there was recently the Intel Science Awards here. Any of you been to the Intel Science Awards? I know Kent Hughes has been. Anybody go to the Intel Science Awards? It's very intimidating. It's awful, because you're meeting 40 of the smartest high school students in the world that have come from thousands of other, it's the old Westinghouse Science Awards, and I was sitting with the former chairman and CEO of Intel and the new president of Intel, Renee James, with a high school student from not too far away, a young woman, who developed a self-healing polymer. I don't know what a self-healing polymer is, but when you describe it, she was sitting with Craig Barrett and Renee James because they were interested in self-healing polymers, and I asked her at the table, I said, have you protected your financial interests in what you've discovered? And I don't know that this young high school student has any idea to do it, but part of this that I think you don't cover is how did Kevin Plank take this notion of a shirt that weighed less from sweat, from playing football, and going out to sort of, he's dealing with Nike, dealing with going out to try and find somebody to make his idea. How did he actually take through? Nobody ever talks about the legal structural steps they go through.
Well, so Kevin's a great story, but I'll give the story of Spanx. So Sarah Blakely, the founder of Spanx, cut the feet out of her nylons.
She's a billionaire now, right?
Yes, she's the youngest self-made female billionaire, but she started as a door-to-door fax saleswoman. 7 years selling fax machines door-to-door in Atlanta, Georgia. And she wanted to have her pants look nicer, and so she was wearing nylons under her pants as she was knocking on doors. She cut the feet out of the nylons to have open-toed shoes. Then the nylons are running up her legs. It's just an irritating situation. And so she basically decides to go to the local mall, Peachtree Mall.
Necessity is the mother of invention.
Yeah, see if there's some undergarment she could wear. It would be like a lot nicer and more comfortable. It didn't exist. Okay, so what she does then to this legal question is she tries to figure out what would be good. She's a cold calling saleswoman. She calls a bunch of hosiery mills. And she's like, hey, could I make this product? Could you help me out? Nobody returns the call. She takes 2 weeks of vacation and drives to the Southeast and basically, as a cold calling saleswoman would, drives in and says, hey, I'm Sarah Blakely and I would like to make this new garment. Could somebody help me? Everybody turns her down, laughs her right out of the factory. She goes back and feels kind of distressed. And then she gets a phone call a couple weeks later from one man who says, I'll make you a prototype. And she says, well, how? Why? And he says, I have 3 daughters. And I basically said, at dinner time, there was this kind of crazy, lady who drove in here and started talking to me about this new kind of underwear. And the daughter said, yeah, that's a good idea. Help her out. So she gets a prototype. Then she tries to get legal help. And she goes to the Chamber of Commerce in Atlanta and says, I need a woman patent attorney because a woman's going to understand this garment. There evidently was not one in Atlanta. It seems crazy, but so she goes around to law firms, all men, and she tries to describe what this undergarment is and why she needs a patent and everything else. And one of the guys is looking all around, like up and in the corner and whatever, and later tells her he thought he was on reality TV. You have a beautiful blonde woman walking in here talking about
It's a great section of the book.
Right,
Yeah.
and so she basically goes to the library and goes to Georgia Tech and buys a couple books, goes, and figures out how to write her own patent and gets that guy on the weekend for $700 to write the little legal clause that's needed. She only had $5,000. That company started with $5,000. And then her mother is a watercolor artist, and her mother draws the sketches, and she files her own patent, and she does it online. And so that's an example. I mean, people find a way. It isn't like, there's some right answer that you just don't have access to. You just keep trying to figure it out. And I think life is a search for allies. And I think that people are just finding allies in the marketplace. So they are finding someone who will help them on whatever piece of the project they're trying to build.
I mean, the other thing that comes out in your book, and I think Steve Case talks about it a lot. Walter Isaacson in his book on the innovators talks about Paris, but clusters of talent seem to be vital, right? And you talk about going to a party of all these entrepreneurs, but the Palantir, eBay guys, LinkedIn, I mean, there seems to be, they don't seem to be able to help themselves from creating billion-dollar companies. Every other, the Yelp guy, Stoppelman. I mean,
Right.
what were they drinking?
So the PayPal mafia, and they're called a mafia because they really do hang together, right? And now they fund each other's businesses, they help each other out. They have failures in there too.
Right.
So the co-founder of PayPal, Max Levchin, he started Slide. It's a failure. It did get acquired, but that's sort of gone away. It's David Sachs, who was the first COO at PayPal, started something called Genie. It was a social network for families. Facebook totally moved into that market, took that over. It's not like every single thing they touch works, but one of the things that they do is it's, again, the fly the OODA loop thing. They will observe, orient, decide, and act. They learned that at PayPal. PayPal had 6 different business models in 18 months. They raised money around the Palm Pilot. Who here had a Palm Pilot? Okay, so there's some Palm Pilot people here. PayPal started by beaming money between Palm Pilots. And then nobody really was doing that, and everyone was trying to use the support demo website that they'd put up. So they observed that, and they quickly oriented.
They almost
decided
tried
and
to
acted.
block it, right?
Well, they almost tried to block the next move, but they observed that, and they moved towards an online model. Then they almost tried to block eBay. So eBay buyers and sellers in the auctions were trying to transact money through this PayPal demo site. And Max Levchin said, oh, crazy eBay people, like, go away, go away. And then they had this epiphany, which was, that's a huge market. If we could just orient to it and build on top of that, which is what they did, that would propel their business forward. And eBay never could catch up with them.
I think I think it may have been Reid Hoffman in the book who said that people wait too long trying to create the perfect product, the
Right.
perfect company, the perfect thing. And he says they wait too long, that they should just go out with the warts.
Right.
And the process will solve the warts.
Yeah, so Reid's quote that I love is, with a startup, you have to throw yourself off a cliff and assemble a plane on the way down. And, the ground is coming. And so time matters. And financing is an updraft. So the more money you have, the longer you have to build the plane. Or you can island hop a little bit, like you can hop and get up. But basically, time is very, very important. You have to make decisions. You have to take actions. And there's nothing that focuses the mind more than that. So, yeah.
Well, let me go to the audience here. One last question. I mean, you were in the White House. You worked in the
I
White
was,
House.
yes.
So, what do you think the biggest lessons of your book are that Barack Obama's team should learn?
That's a good question. I think the biggest lesson is that you have to basically do all of these things in combination. You can't just focus on one thing. I think many White Houses, there's an obsession with the issue of the hour.
Right.
And I think that really good entrepreneurs or really good, leaders are basically able to move through all of these steps. That's when the magic happens. You can't be single solo focused. And I think any White House, and you can look back at issues, whether it's the war in Iraq or it's the financial economy or, it's the Middle East or whatever, we get just glommed on to one thing. And I think that the 6 skills here are basically showing that you have to be moving through all the time on multiple fronts.
I couldn't help but read this of thinking about the entrepreneurial presidency, which we don't have yet in my view, but it would be interesting to have a presidency, because the presidency, in contrast to Congress, while you still have to work with Congress, you've got to deal with legal and justice issues, you get to pick your team. And so it's interesting in picking your team and ordering tasks that there actually are a lot of lessons in this book that could be useful. Let me open to the floor. Questions, comments? Let's go to this gentleman right here on the right.
Hi, thank you. I found it very interesting, and no, I haven't had a chance to read your book. But one of the questions I would like to know, my wife's a journalist. Other than the Huffington Post, which gets a lot of people to write for them without paying them, is anybody currently working on a business model for journalism?
You probably know better than I do.
We all are.
Yeah.
We all are, and we're all. I mean, it's a great question. That's why I find myself really taken with the new groups like BuzzFeed, Vox, Vice, are so interesting, and I think they're a step beyond what HuffPost has done. It's a different way of arraying talent. I'm not sure I would call it a. We don't know if it's sustainable yet. If you take the Atlantic Media Company, which is a mix of everything. We've just created. We're not sort of not paying people. But if you look at a publication like Quartz at QZ.com, which is the biggest online challenger to the Financial Times and The Economist, and beating them. We created it out of nothing. And so you take a non-branded instant weed that has grown like crazy, and you compare that to The Atlantic, which is a 157-year-old publication, which was not profitable forever, but is now profitable, grew 17% in newsstand and subscriptions in a year when print publications went down 11%. Does that mean that we continue to cling on to that old model? No. What's saving The Atlantic is everything digital, going from 300,000 uniques in 2002 to 30 million uniques a month now. So we're all trying to find the business model that works, and I don't think it's clear, but I do think there's a lot more evolution that will come. But the Voxes, the Vices, the BuzzFeeds are giving us a real run for the money because they're organized differently and driven differently. And eventually we'll have to see whether their money and investments are sustainable. Yes, right here.
Thanks, Steve. Hi, Amy. Rob Colorina, AIAC Investments. Could you comment a little bit about corporatizing, where these owners and founders have to essentially shift, where they've grown to a point where it's diminishing returns on operating, you have to do something new, or they have to shift to professional management. That's everything. And then the Musk example is
So
really
the founder
interesting.
problem, right? So the founder challenge versus new management coming and take over.
So the data set here are people who were founders who stayed at their companies. So Kevin Plank, Under Armour, they're now a $3 billion in annual revenue company just out of Baltimore. He is still the CEO. There are some examples in the data set where people like Sarah Blakely have stepped aside. She runs sales and marketing. She is hired in a CEO. So there are different patterns by which founders either stay. Mark Zuckerberg is still the CEO founder at Facebook, or others have stepped aside. So Pierre Omidyar at eBay is long gone from eBay. I think there are different models. So I am most interested where the founder stays at least at the company. You don't always have to stay in the leadership role. And one of the things about networking minds is really you want to attract a lot of other talent to support where you are weak or where you need other problem-solving help. And so, where that happens along the pathway depends sometimes on just individuals and individual leadership and growth trajectory. Hamdi Ulukaya at Chobani, that's a $0 to $1 billion company in 5 years. In Greek yogurt, it's crazy. So it just depends on how fast you grow and then what your personal capability is. But all of these people are hiring teams. No one is creating a large company by themselves. So whether they stay the founder or they co-share, the Chipotle founder is a co-CEO with someone else, with Monty Moran. So, different structures are working for different people at different times.
But Hamdi was the one that saw that old cheese plant. I've interviewed him. He's a crazy guy and so much fun. And you start out this guy with this multi-billion-dollar company, and his first job was to sort of paint this decaying wall.
That's right.
And he painted it himself, and it was just.
He buys a craft factory that's being shut down in upstate New York, and his friends just think it's crazy because he doesn't really have enough money to buy a house. He takes out a big loan and he buys this factory that's being shut down, and now Kraft can't catch up. I mean, it's amazing. It's an amazing story.
Yeah, right here, Ken.
Ken Dillon, Cincia Press. A question of fact. Going back to find a gap, you said there were 3 ways to do it. What's the third way?
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. We did get cut off. I appreciate that very much.
I probably interrupted
you. So the third way is as an integrator. So this is the Chipotle is a great example, and it's the idea that when you integrate different things or you see things at an intersection, that creates novelty. So the Chipotle founder was classically trained chef at the New York Culinary Academy. He was working at Star's Restaurant, which was a very elite, exclusive restaurant in San Francisco, hanging out in the Mission District of San Francisco, loving burritos, and basically looked around in the fast food category and said, how come fast food is only hamburgers that are frozen and reheated at the time? And so, trained as a chef, he integrates the idea that you could prepare food in front of people, you could do it quickly. This is cooking for the line, is what it's called with Chipotle's model. And he integrates and creates a new category called fast casual. So it's a whole new kind of restaurant that Chipotle, now there are multiple models like this. but it's the same idea as luxury cars and an all-terrain vehicle. You put that together, you get a luxury SUV. You integrate it, that's a huge category. Or shabby and chic in the design world. You want it to be casual, but you want it to be nice. You integrate things that haven't been put together, and you've basically spotted a big opportunity. So there's quite a lot of academic research around all three of these ways of seeing as well.
Ken Jarbo, right there, right behind you.
Amy, thanks for the book. I actually
Use your louder voice, Ken.
use my political voice. Is that the idea?
Be proud.
Amy, I did read the book. Thanks for the copy. When we talk about entrepreneurship, we often break it down to startup versus scale up. And reading your stories, I never quite got a division there. Is that division real? Did you find that division? It goes part to the founder question of somebody has a great idea and somebody else has to take it to scale. Are the skills the same in startup as they are in scale up, or or is that not a useful dichotomy?
Interesting.
So these are all high-scale examples. So I'm not thinking about it in that way. These are founders that scaled over 100 million in annual revenue, and 100 million in annual revenue is a very big startup. So there are plenty of startups that make 1 million in annual revenue, or 5 million, or 10 million. 100 million is a very large target to be hitting. And I think that the principles apply whether you actually want to stay small, and some people do. Some people don't want to go to scale. That argument is made with lifestyle businesses. Oh, I'm just very happy having 5 employees, or a hobby business. This is great. I'm sort of just running this on the side. I think the skills are still helping you be more effective. But the data set is showing that whether you're in the first moment, or year 1, or year 2, or year 5, or year 7, when you're going to scale like this, the 6 things are what are taking those ideas to scale.
Great. Is that Bay? Oh, no.
Hi, my name is Sophia Liu, work at the U.S. Geological Survey. I just wanted to ask you, what are your thoughts on the Presidential Innovation Fellows Program, and with folks, colleagues of mine like Leah Shanley, who came out from the Wilson Center, and others. What are your thoughts on how the president's trying to bring in that startup culture into the government?
And can I piggyback on that?
Yeah, please,
Would
go for
any of the people you profiled dare join the Presidential Innovation Fellows Program?
The people that I profiled are running their companies.
Right. I mean,
So-
but I mean, people, I think earlier in their careers before they got to that 100. So I find it, one of the interesting questions is, the president wants to go out, or you've got a Presidential Innovation Fellows Program. Would people like she's writing about be discovered or found in that, or would they look at that as a complete waste of time? As I find most of the people that you profiled to have a real disdain for this town. Maybe Elon Musk being an exception.
So I think that's changing. I think Silicon Valley, I moved out of Silicon Valley 10 years ago to do a White House fellowship. I was at McKinsey in San Francisco as a consultant. And I'll be honest and say people at McKinsey could not believe I would leave San Francisco and do a White House fellowship. That's a great opportunity. I mean, those are wonderful leadership fellowships. I personally think that we need more people who will cross disciplines, geographies, that will come in and out of government. We really need talented people in government. Silicon Valley is waking up to this as well. I think after 2008, 9, 10, Elon Musk at Tesla did take bailout loans to keep Tesla running. A lot of different businesses were lined up trying to figure out, when the economy looked very tough, how the government could help them. And now I think that in the last 2 to 3 years, in Silicon Valley specifically, but elsewhere, there's a lot of question about how can we work better together? How can you understand someone who speaks a totally different language? Instead of just saying policymakers are not doing a good job, there's a lot of people saying, I can help you do a better job. And I can bring in these technology tools. The Obama campaign is an example of it, just with voting, getting out the vote. I think we're seeing coming together, in fact, which is exciting to me, because in the past, Silicon Valley was just so interested in being left alone. And now I think they're interested in getting into solving this problem. They like solving problems, and government's pretty broken right now. So I think that there's quite a lot of interest in making it better, and that attracts talent.
Great. You're right here in the front.
Thank you very much. My name is Peter Clemons. I'm ambassador of Slovakia, and I just shared your great book among Slovak startups and innovators.
Thank
Really?
you.
How many copies did you
So
buy?
be ready.
job.
Be ready for influx of Slovak ideas
good.
to the U.S. market. Currently, we are marketing a concept of flying car, a Slovak startup in the U.S., and that's a great idea of integration of luxury car and flying concept.
car.
But my question is, you mentioned at the beginning the underperformance of millennials compared to baby boomers, and the question is how to incorporate your great ideas into the educational system, because this is the challenge, how to prepare our kids with better financial intelligence and entrepreneurial skills. So maybe that's the inspiration for the new book.
Question.
Yeah.
Great question. Thanks, Ambassador.
So I think that we have an old school education model in the United States. It's a factory model, right? And just like business used to be about scaling up factory lines, the education system looks like that too. So I was just asked to talk to 900 admissions officers for independent schools for the SATs, because the question is, does the SAT test what we need for an entrepreneurial economy? Probably not, right? If we're just filling in little bubbles. But that's how we're educating right now in the United States. So the question is, what do you do to make it better? I think I can point to one example, which is FIRST Robotics. Dean Kamen is the founder of the Segway, and FIRST Robotics is this unbelievable experiential learning model. It's coming into DC this weekend, if anybody wants to see this. It's 6 weeks of pairing up kids in teams of 4 with a mentor coach that would come from industry, like Boeing or BAE Systems. They're given a box of materials, and they have to build a robot. And so then their robot gets to play basically basketball against another robot, and they're in teams and they're in divisional leagues and everything else. That makes math very real, and science and physics and problem solving. It makes collaboration in teams really real. And kids learn things that if you're trying to teach them math just by themselves in a classroom, they're not really engaging with it.
I couldn't recommend this enough. Dean Kamen spoke at the Washington Ideas Forum, which I helped organize in December. And you know, when you sort of look at the many people that are part of this book, Dean is not only making the Segway and robotics for amputees and all these sort of crazy other things. I mean, he's a serial entrepreneur.
He's an inventor,
and
one of
creator
the
and
greatest
inventor,
inventors in the
one of the
US.
greatest inventors of this age. But he's really committed to the same thing you are, which is on-ramps for young people to think about these things, that there shouldn't be barriers. And so I couldn't recommend.
I think one
strongly
thing
enough.
about FIRST and about some of this experiential learning models is that then people are in groups. So right now, again, like the factory line model of education, this is a 1 by 1 by 1. People in the past have wanted to be a 4-point student. When they collaborate, we call that cheating, right? That's not, we actually need people to collaborate in an entrepreneurial economy, so we need
Amy
to be teaching
Wilkinson
that.
promoting cheating.
Yeah.
As a new
That is not a
pathway in
tweetable
new era.
moment.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that we need to teach in a different way. The Stanford D School, the design school at Stanford, is a great model for it, and I'm going back to teach at Stanford. You know, a lot of the endowment now is going to get, Stanford's endowment is going to get placed on this, and it is 7 different graduate schools all coming together and the undergraduate program trying to solve problems. So you actually see teams at the design school, the D school. The latest thing I was watching was them try to solve this TSA security phenomenon. You know, everyone doesn't like the security problem at the airports. So what if you get, you know, a doctor and a neuroscience person and an educator and an MBA and you know, all these different backgrounds together, and then say, let's make the TSA experience better. It's about design thinking, and it's about this collaborative approach. I think we'll see more and more like that in education.
I should also mention that Stephen Schwartzman, who's been the head of Blackstone Group, has put an awful lot of money into universities around the country in creating essentially a fund for kids to fail. In other words, to develop business plans, take ideas, go out, and I interviewed the president of the University of Miami, who said this is the only place in our college where kids could fail, which is an interesting problem, right? So failure as part of this, failing well, failing right, learning from it is such a natural part of the success stories here, but our universities don't promote that. And so Schwartzman is doing this in a lot of universities in California, Midwest, so something to look at for those of you who are looking
Let
at
me add
resources.
one more thing,
right here
too.
in the front. Yeah.
There's really interesting research by Carol Dweck in the schools in New York City saying that we should be praising efforts, not smarts. So we have said to kids, hey, you're really smart. You're a 4-point student. You're going to get into an Ivy League school. Like, isn't that great? And there's an experiment that's written into the book, but it's with 5th graders. And if you tell 5th graders, hey, you're so smart, and then you give them puzzles that they can't solve, when they start stumbling, they feel
What
humiliated.
about the kindergartners and the spaghettis
Oh yeah, that's another great example.
who beat all the engineers?
That's right. Yeah, but to finish this Carol Dweck thing, it
Got to read the
basically
book to know more.
yeah, it's basically that kids that have been told that they are really, really smart, then they are embarrassed and they actually do start cheating to try to solve these problems. Kids that you have praised for effort say, oh, I work so hard and it's so great that you always persevere and you try one more time and everything else. When they stumble in these experiments, they want to take the thing home. They want to learn more. They're actually not embarrassed by it. And so there's a lot of research there around growth mindsets versus fixed mindsets. And we can be teaching people differently.
Right here in the front.
Deb Novak, Thrivers. Several of my backgrounds tie into everything we're talking about, education to politics to government to
Just
my
hold the mic right up
organization.
to you.
Oh,
Yeah, there we
sorry,
go.
that's
Yeah.
the old teacher thing in me.
Uh-huh.
So what I'd found was in teaching, being very innovative, creative, worked extremely well for the kids and the parents. But long story short, I actually got put on unofficial probation because my room wasn't supposed to be fun, teaching 16 children, 3rd, 4th, 5th grade with learning disabilities and mostly behavior disorders. However, it works for the kids, but not the system. Bounced into politics because of that. Same thing when I ran for office. Having been begged for 6 years to run, eventually within about 2 months, both parties came and said, sit down, shut up, you're giving people too much information. So those experiences are now pointing out to me, now living in this area of DC, coming back to the question of, do things work in this area? I found living in Colorado, living in Iowa, you have a grassroots support system. You can kind of bypass leadership and still work on what you're doing at that grassroots level. But bringing it to DC and having worked on some of the things I've worked on here, you don't really have that grassroots level. So my question is, in your research, what was their support structure like? Did they have a combination? Did they have more of a grassroots support system
Great.
for their success rather than a, is that making sense?
Yeah,
what I'm
yeah. What was a support system for these folks other than total failure and with no one there?
No
to
one
hold them?
else. No. Well, these people are in different places in the United States, so they are building companies in different locations. I would say they all have allies. So whether they are allies out of universities, there are people talking about recruiting friends that they had studied with. There are other people that are in accelerators. So Airbnb will credit the fact that that worked because of Y Combinator, which is an accelerator in Silicon Valley. So that's more support to that company. Depending, Chipotle will say he had a great network of friends and family. So there are different
That comes out in the book,
support.
that the friend network that can absorb the shock of loss and failure and regroup it comes out very strongly in your book.
I think that's right. I think that people who have to be brave, you have to be courageous to be starting something that nobody has done before. This is not replicating other ideas. This is like going out to find people that you can partner with. And there's quite a lot of conversation in the book too. You have to have people tell you the truth. So when you are coming up short, when it's not working, you ask your friends because they see it. They may in fact see it before you do. They may not want to hurt your feelings, but you have to say, please help me figure out what the next step is that will get this, idea into the world.
This gentleman right here, and this will be our last question before we all have a great party.
So, thank you very much.
Tell us who you are.
My name is Marcus, and I'm from Germany. And I was just wondering, for 2 questions which are related. First of all, in your sample or in your data set, are there any companies outside of the US? And then second question, do you think like this 6 essential skills, are they applicable for other countries as well, or are they more focused on the US is, for example, in terms of financial support in Germany, it's way more difficult to get financial support from the
And did you sell the German
banks.
rights to your book?
Yeah.
So the data set is all US based. Originally, I had interviewed some people outside of the United States, but the publisher wanted a US based book. So we have, US entrepreneurs. I sold global rights. So this went live in all English speaking world 2 weeks after the United States. So it's in Europe, India, Australia, New Zealand, the UK already. It will be coming out in China and Korea and Brazil. And, so it's rolling internationally in different languages. And maybe there's a second book coming about the differences culturally with entrepreneurs, because that's true. Depending on where you are raised and a lot of the risk appetite, it's more difficult or not as difficult if you have a setback. I think that the skills are universal. I think that the culture in which you live, if you're in Germany, if you're in Brazil, if you're in China or India, it's different. And so that might be book number 2.
Now, I can imagine a South by Southwest session with Amy Wilkinson, with some of your stars, with people paying thousands of dollars a ticket to hear what they could easily read in your book. Are you going to take this on the road?
Well, I think so. I just came home from South by Southwest.
Oh.
Last week, so there you
People
go.
pay thousands of dollars a ticket?
No, not yet.
Okay. Well, listen,
Yeah.
Amy Wilkinson, thank you very much. Thank you. What a wonderful tour de force through what
thank
the
you.
Creators Code and what the 6 pillars for anyone to sort of think about and how they organize themselves with entrepreneurial startups and ideas they're passionate about. And thanks for coming back to the Wilson Center where
Thank
this all
you.
started.
And thanks for coming, everyone.
Thank you.